You're just a little too old school for where we're headed. That's what Tyler Knox said, reclining in my chair. My chair, as if he'd bought it with his own first bonus. Designer blazer, clean sneakers, the kind that never saw a factory floor. He talked about innovation the way some people talk about weather. Loud, confident, and not quite accountable for the forecast. Evan Cole's name floated in there too. A brilliant mind, 29, fresh off a talk that trended for a day and a half. I nodded, shook Tyler's hand, and felt the quiet click of a door closing behind me. I'm Michael Carver, 62. Until this morning, I was Meridian's chief financial officer. When I joined, we were a family outfit with 3 small plants clinging to Cincinnati like barnacles to a barge. Now we're public, 18 facilities across the Midwest, 1,000 humble success stories stitched in a payroll. 15 years sounds long until you pack it into a single cardboard box. Turns out legacy is weightless when it needs to fit between 2 palms. I waited for the hallways to empty into an all-hands meeting about our new direction. It was easier to slide the frames from my walls without an audience. A photo of the first plant after the retrofit. A coin from our IPO. The leather portfolio Elena gave me. Dark brown, scuffed. She used to joke that it made me look like a trustworthy villain in an old movie. Cancer took her 3 years ago. Since then, I've carried the portfolio like a small, reliable oath. At the elevator, I ran into Renee from accounts. Her eyes shone, the way eyes do when they want to be brave and fail a little. It's all right, I told her. Just part of the cycle. That's the Midwestern way. Say the weather's turning and mean your heart is. She nodded and pressed the button. I almost told her what I've been doing for 6 months. Quiet notes, clean copies, timestamps lined up like fence posts. But good people shouldn't have to carry more than they already do. In my first year, Martin Hale, the founder, taught me something I already knew from my father's hardware store in Covington. Numbers don't lie, even when people do. It's not romantic. It's not even dramatic. It's simply faithful. The problem is, the language of modern finance can make lies sound like progress. Tyler arrived with synergy and disruption and realigned vision. Words arranged like a neon sign to sell the same room at a higher price. The first week, a consultant billed at 4 times our standard rate. The second week, procurement became friction. The third, he floated Evan Cole, a wunderkind with the exact resume boards crave when they're tired of steady and hungry for sleek. I carried my box past the glass that reflected me as a smaller man than I felt. Not angry. Something colder, tidier. The kind of feeling that makes you line up papers edge to edge. I wasn't planning revenge. I was remembering who I am. Someone who sleeps better when the books balance. The elevator doors opened with their usual untheatrical sigh. I stepped in, holding my whole career like a loaf of bread. Floor numbers blinked down, patient as a ledger. Old school, maybe, but old school saves the receipts. I learned to read a balance sheet before I learned to parallel park. My father's hardware store sat on Pike Street in Covington, a narrow ribbon of shelves with nails and coffee cans, and a bell that rang when the door swung open. I stocked bolts after school, swept sawdust into small, apologetic piles, and closed the register while Dad added columns by hand. He'd say, "Numbers are like river stones, Mike. They don't change shape just because you squint." When customers couldn't pay all at once, he wrote their names in a little black notebook and circled dates like quiet prayers. We weren't saints. We simply believed in the arithmetic of trust. I carried that ledger logic to college at night, to my first analyst job after, and eventually to Meridian, back when Martin Hale called me himself. "I need someone who sleeps better when the books balance," he said. I told him I hadn't had insomnia since '86. Under Martin, we kept things boring on purpose. Boring is a virtue in accounting. It means payroll hits Fridays, vendors get paid net 30, and the pension matches arrive when they should. When Linda Park took over from Martin, she didn't try to autograph the company. She respected the scaffolding. Our growth felt like a decent walk after dinner. Steady, good for the heart. Then came the era of declaimed brilliance. Glossy decks, words with elbows. Tyler Knox blew in, all kinetic charm and promises to unlock value. The first red flag looked like a receipt. An outside marketing consultant hired without procurement, a classmate of his, billed at quadruple our usual rate. I asked for the scope of work, received a mood board. "We're thinking bigger now," Tyler said, like bigger was its own spreadsheet line. Week 2, he rethreaded reporting lines so finance filtered through a chief innovation officer before landing on his desk. I tried to smile at the org chart and felt my teeth complain. Week 3, he called our controls outdated methodology and praised creative solutions. There are creative songs, creative pastries, creative rearrangements of living room furniture. Creative accounting is just a lie in a suit. That's when Jonah from internal audit stepped into my office near closing, the way people do when they want to be near a door. "The new tech investment tracking," he said softly, "it doesn't reconcile. Numbers shift between entry and report." He didn't accuse, he observed. The best auditors do that. I told him what my father would have told me. Document everything. Keep it factual. Let the numbers speak. I started small. Screenshots with timestamps. Vendor checks against state registries. Board minutes cross-referenced to budget reallocations. I didn't grandstand in meetings or raise my voice. The Midwest trains you to measure twice and saw once. Meanwhile, Tyler skipped procurement again, this time for digital transformation, vendors with names that sounded like scenic overlooks. Contract deliverables were vague, signatures arrived out of order, and wire instructions changed at the last minute. Patterns, then echoes of patterns. I didn't feel heroic. I felt like a carpenter tapping studs, hearing where the hollow starts. I wasn't planning showdown. I was preserving a trail, in case the weather turned, in case someone needed to see the river stones under the current. The board meeting that erased me lasted 22 minutes, which is about how long it takes to boil an egg. I sat at the far end, the end for people who are already gone, while Tyler clicked through slides with confident wrists. He said, "New fiscal architecture and capital agility," and a dozen other phrases that made money sound like a personality trait. Our chairman, Walter Briggs, didn't quite meet my eyes. He had been there when Martin Hale hired me. He had shaken my hand the day we rang the bell. Now he nodded along as if innovation could be notarized. Evan Cole's headshot glowed on the screen. Young, brilliant, a TED-stage smile. I watched the room lean forward. No one asked about the ledger that had carried us here. We moved from CFO transition update to new headquarters downtown, like a river switching channels. No thank you speech. No plaque. No watch. Just the quiet shuffling of papers. The collective relief of people who prefer their discomforts off the agenda. When it was over, Walter paused by my chair. "You've been an asset, Mike," he murmured, and patted my shoulder the way you pat a copier after it jams. An asset. Something to depreciate and replace. I walked back to my office, Evan's office now, and saw Tyler already touring him through the glass, pointing at the framed graphs I'd kept like family photos. They looked at them as though they were cave paintings from a slower kind of human. I picked up my box. The leather portfolio Elena gave me sat on top, the coin from our IPO tucked beneath like a secret. Renee waited outside my door with an envelope. "From the team," she said, almost apologizing for the kindness. I thanked her, then asked as lightly as weather, "When did the Vertex Dynamics invoices start?" She frowned, counting backward the way accountants do, in months, not headlines. "February," she said, right after Tyler announced the Digital Transformation Initiative. February. 2 weeks before he first floated Evan's name in my office. At home, I cleared the dining table and made a map of the last 6 months. I've always believed that if you can see the whole thing at once, the lies run out of places to hide. Spreadsheets printed and taped edge to edge. Expense lines with sticky notes like flags. Vendor names checked against registries. Wire transfers with peculiar timing, always just before quarter end, like nervous breaths. Again and again, different vendors channeled through a single hub, Summit Avenue Holdings. I traced its registration, formed 3 days before the press release that announced Tyler's hire. A fresh shell, still smelling of ink. I stood a while, thinking of my father and his little black notebook, of Elena's steady hand on mine at the lake, of how the Midwestern heart learns to survive by not making a scene. I wasn't angry. Anger is noisy and burns too fast. What I felt was the same hush I got the night before an audit, the quiet that lets small numbers speak. They'd call me old school. All right, old school packs the parachute before the jump. I opened the portfolio, slid a legal pad free, and began to index the trail, page numbers, cross-references, external timestamps. No speeches, no threats, just a ledger that would not blink. I called Walter Briggs the next morning because decency deserved one more try. His assistant answered on the second ring and transferred me with the kind of politeness that suggests a script. Walter's voice came on, cautious but warm around the edges. "Mike," he said, "I figured you might reach out." He told me Tyler and Evan had already briefed him on my transition difficulties, that any concerns I had about new systems were being handled. "Walter," I said, "some irregularities predate Evan. Significant ones." Silence stood between us like a slow elevator. "This is a sensitive time," he replied, and promised nothing. By afternoon, legal emailed a letter that read like a handshake wrapped in a warning. They reminded me of my confidentiality, advised me that claims without substantial evidence could be defamatory, and signed off with "We wish you well." I printed it and slid it under a magnet shaped like a lighthouse. It's good to know where the rocks are. That evening I met Jonah at a diner out by the expressway, the kind with a pie carousel and coffee that tastes like 4 a.m. "They promoted me," he said before hello. "New title, bigger paycheck, reporting directly to Evan." The words sat heavy. He kept glancing at the door like a man who expects his name to be called when he owes money. "They've swapped out the internal reporting. New software, new protocols. Everything's quicker," he said, but his mouth made the shape of the word brittle. "And?" I asked. He folded a napkin into a thin, nervous ribbon. "I signed more NDAs. They're monitoring access logs. People who worked with you are visible." He swallowed. "They're saying you fought necessary changes. That you misposted entries last quarter, and Evan caught it. I know it's not true, Mike, but it's spreading." He didn't look at me when he said it. Shame isn't always about guilt. Sometimes it's about proximity. "I've got twins starting college," he added, finally meeting my eyes. "A mortgage that feels like a second job. I can't." I nodded. "Take care of your family," I said. "That's the right spreadsheet." He put too much cash on the table and left as if someone had just called his name after all. I drove home through the familiar lace of river roads, the skyline in the rear view, like a reminder to keep going. I wasn't surprised by the smear. It's easier to erase a person than a paper trail. Lucky for me, I'd always been better with paper. In my last week, while everyone assumed I was boxing plaques and wiping the whiteboard, I had set up an emergency admin account. Nothing sneaky, just the standard backstop you establish when roles change and you don't want a cascade failure at month end. No one had asked about it. Perhaps they had never needed a parachute. That night I logged in. The audit server opened like a quiet room after a storm, still, humming, honest. I followed the pathways I had marked. Invoices, wire confirmations, approval chains that bent at strange angles. The deeper I went, the more the pattern held. Vendors with fresh registrations, addresses that belonged to mail drops, signatures that traveled between entities like a rubber stamp in fast hands. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt what I used to feel in the hardware store, counting bolts in the back, a steadiness that has nothing to prove. The work would take the time it needed. I poured coffee. I listened to the soft machine of the server and began to peel the story from its numbers. By midnight, the map on my screen looked less like accounting and more like weather. Fronts colliding, pressure lines curving toward a storm. Summit Avenue Holdings sat in the middle like a quiet cul-de-sac, but every vendor with a scenic name seemed to turn down that street. Filing dates clustered around company milestones the way birds gather before winter. Addresses resolved to co-working spaces, UPS boxes, the occasional law office that specialized in forming LLCs on short notice. When I traced wire paths, I found the same routing numbers repeating like a nervous habit. Money left our accounts, put on a pair of glasses and a hat, walked 2 doors down, and claimed to be someone new. The part that made me set my coffee down, some of the entities predated Tyler's glossy arrival. I stared at the timestamps. Either I had missed it earlier, possible, if painful, or the infiltration began before the board opened the door. The pattern didn't smell like a lone opportunist. It smelled like choreography. So I widened the circle. I pulled proxy statements, committee appointments, the sort of dry reading that makes your eyes feel like folded paper. That's where I found the thread. An investment group that had recently won 3 board seats. On paper, they were activist investors with a mission to unlock value. In practice, Their portfolio included Tyler's last startup, the one with sizzle and no stake. The overlap was tidy enough to frame. One of those seats belonged to Walter Briggs's nephew, Jacob. I'd seen him slip in late to meetings, all energy and enthusiasm, like the part of the song that makes people clap even if they don't know the words. I took a breath and followed a hunch. Evan Cole, the wunderkind, buried 3 years back, in a state filing no one reads unless they have a reason, was his name as a founding partner of Vertex Dynamics, removed later from public-facing material, but still inked where ink is stubborn. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt confirmed. The way a carpenter feels when the stud finder beeps exactly where instinct said it would. By 4 a.m., I had a ledger of the damage I could prove without anyone's testimony. Just over 12 million diverted in thin slices. Consulting fees with no deliverables. Inflated services, pilot programs that never left the runway. Not catastrophic. Not yet, but steady as a drip in a cold house. You wake up one morning, and the pipe has burst, and everyone blames the weather. My phone rang as dawn pulled a gray ribbon across the river. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, then answered. Michael Carver. The woman's voice was measured, like someone who has learned to carry sharp objects carefully. This is Naomi Reyes with the SEC Enforcement Division. I walked to the window. The city looked innocent at that hour. We receive an anonymous tip regarding Meridian's new leadership team and potential financial irregularities. Your name came up as someone with historical knowledge. She was careful not to claim more than she could. Someone had gotten there first. Good. Terrifying. I told her the truth, or most of it. I'd recently left. I was reviewing my files. I needed some time to be precise. Time for what? She asked. To make sure the story is strong enough to carry its own weight, I said. After we hung up, I got practical. 3 days. I built a dead man switch. If I didn't enter a code, every 48 hours, the entire package would go to the SEC, the DOJ, and 3 reporters who live for numbers, not headlines. Then I drafted a list of the clean ones, the board members who still looked like straight edges on a warped table. Claire Morrison, Dr. Ravi Patel, Arthur Wynn. I would send them enough to make them listen, not enough to make them panic. The storm had shape now. All I had to do was let the weather roll in and keep the records dry. I set the timer on my phone like a heartbeat I could see. 48 hours until the first dead man switch checked for my touch. If I missed it, the files would fly on their own wings. SEC, DOJ, 3 journalists who care about footnotes more than adjectives. I named the package Ledger. Simple names carry farther. Then I wrote to the 3 I believed were still straight edges in a warped frame. Claire Morrison, who ran plants before she ran meetings. Dr. Ravi Patel, voice for the pension fund. Arthur Wynn, oldest face at the table, quiet as a gavel before the strike. I didn't accuse. I asked questions only numbers can ask. 3 emails, each with a different small set of receipts, enough to force a pause, not yet a fire. I scheduled them for 2 days out noon. There's a mercy in timing. Give people a lunch to think. I called Renee. Coffee? I asked. She said yes the way tired people say yes, then arrived with a notebook and a face that had practiced being fine. We sat by the window where the light flattened everything into honesty. They're gutting finance, she said. Consolidating, they call it. Half of us have reassignment opportunities. The other half get reviews with moving targets. She tried to smile. Do I sound disloyal? No, I said. You sound employed. Do you remember the acquisition audit protocol from when we absorbed Jackson Components? I asked. The parallel trail. Her brows pulled together, then lifted. The mirror ledger, she said. Transactions over 50,000 auto-duplicate to the secure server. Different credentials. Read only. I nodded. Is it still running? She thought about the people who would know and came up empty. It's hard-coded, she said finally. They'd have to know to turn it off. And the offsite archives. I asked. First of each month. Granite Vault pickups. October already shipped. Relief is quiet when it's real. I slid a sealed envelope across to her. This triggers an internal audit you're obliged to initiate as a senior manager. It references only what you legitimately see. Filing it activates whistleblower protections. They can't touch you without writing it down. Her hands trembled. Is this why I'm redundant? Probably, I said. But paper makes memory. She squared her shoulders like a runner toes a line. I'll submit it tomorrow. I nodded. Morning is best. Let them eat it with their bagels. Afterward, I stopped at a notary. The affidavit was 30 pages of simple sentences. Dates don't need adverbs. I initialed every corner, signed where the ink told me to, felt the stamped thump like a small drum. At my lawyer's office, I left a sealed letter with instructions to open if I missed 2 consecutive codes. The receptionist offered me a peppermint. I took 2. That night, I worked through the trail again, not to find more but to make it clearer. Names lined up with addresses, approvals with timestamps, wires with endpoints. Near midnight, my phone lit with a message from Jonah. Evans asking about old audit protocols. Questions feel specific. Be careful. I typed back thank you and set another timer. Somewhere between the river and the sky, the city exhaled. I checked my switch, watched the seconds shiver, and felt the mirror ledger at my back like a second spine. If they tried to rewrite the story, the first draft was already safe where hands can't reach. 6 weeks after my box ride in the elevator, the fuse reached the powder. It didn't roar. It clicked. Renee filed her internal complaint at 8:06 a.m., a neat packet with receipts that didn't shout, they simply pointed. At noon, my scheduled messages slid into the inboxes of Claire, Dr. Patel, and Arthur. Numbers arranged themselves like witnesses. By 2, Claire had invoked her authority as audit committee chair and called an emergency session. Meetings multiply when control thins. Renee texted from a bathroom stall because courage is private before it's public. They've pulled the mirror ledger. IT says it exists. Evan looks pale. 10 minutes later, outside auditors in the lobby. Security just unlocked the big conference room. I picture the carpet there, a blue that tried to be calm. I picture the way paper stacks lean when no one wants to touch them first. By 4, HR sent notices. Administrative leave for every executive who'd arrived under Tyler's banner. No dramatic perp walks, just escorted hallways and laptops closed with a kind of mercy. Mid-afternoon sunlight makes even bad news look organized. Renee again. Tyler's door shut. Legal in there. Claire keeps asking for original approvals with timestamps. The simple things are the sharpest knives. I turn my phone face down and walk the river path. Wind off the water, iron in it. Barges moved like slow decisions. The skyline blinked awake one window at a time, and for the first time in months, my shoulders set themselves down. I thought of Elena's hand in mine on evenings like this. We used to count barges as if they were prayers. When I got home, the missed calls were stacked like coasters. Walter Briggs. Tyler. Then Jacob Briggs, a number I'd never saved but recognized by context. The entitled rhythm of a nephew's urgency. I let them sit. In the pile was a voicemail from Arthur Wynn. His voice, old oak. Mike, call when you can. I called. He didn't weigh syllables. 15 years without a stain, he said. We should have said that out loud today. I'll let the quiet hold that truth. The board has appointed me acting chair while we sort the wreckage. Walter and Jacob resigned. 2 others too. Tyler and Evan are terminated for cause. He waited, as if listening for my breath. We need you to help the outside team. Temporarily. Stabilize the banks. Help the auditors follow the language you wrote. I looked at the portfolio on my desk, its leather the color of old coffee. Outside, a freight horn sounded, patient and low. I'll help with the investigation, I said. I'll make it clear and clean, but I won't be coming back. A pause, not offended. May I ask why? Because Meridian needs someone who can innovate. I answered, and let a smile bend the words. And I'm just a little too old school. He chuckled, a sound like a book closing. Old school built the shelves. After we hung up, I checked my timer. Enter the code. Watched the countdown reset like a heartbeat returning to a steady line. Somewhere downtown, a different clock started for other men. Arraignments, statements, new lawyers buying new pens. I washed a single coffee cup and set it to dry. Then I sat by the window and let the quiet do its work. 3 months later, the mountains taught me a slower clock. Mornings begin with a hush that feels earned. The cabin I bought outside Asheville is plain, 2 bedrooms, an office facing the ridgeline, and the deck is a long plank of forgiveness. I keep the leather portfolio on the desk, the coin from our IPO, in its side pocket like a polite ghost. When dusk brushes the Blue Ridge, everything I kept neat inside my chest loosens without breaking. The investigation confirmed what the numbers had whispered. Tyler and Evan stood at the center of a scheme that dressed theft as transformation. The charges carry long names: securities fraud, embezzlement. But the harm is simple. They try to make someone else pay for their hunger. Several board members resigned before the gavel found them. Others will sit in long rooms while lawyers move commas. Meridian accepted fines and governance reforms that protect workers and shareholders. The only outcome I prayed for. Consequence without collapse. It can be done if you're willing to write the ledger clean and let it speak. I spent 6 weeks with the forensic team, translating what I'd built into a path they could follow. After we were done, I packed my Cincinnati life into a truck and drove south, chasing a promise Elena and I once made on a cloudy weekend trip. When we're old, she said, let's live where morning keeps its hands to itself. I'm not old exactly, but I am ready for quiet. Renee texted last night, director of accounting. We're rebuilding, she wrote. Properly this time. I sent back. Well deserved. Always keep a parallel trail. Jonah called too. A long, awkward gratitude that sounded like a son's voice after bad weather. Thank you for not making me a hero, he said. I'm just a father who needs the mortgage paid. I told him that was hero enough. Sometimes I open Elena's portfolio and take out the photo from the lake. A small moment with sunlight on her cheek, the water behind us forgiving every sharp edge. You were right, I say softly. I should have made more time for views like this. Now I do. I walk the ridge at noon. I count the hawks. I keep a notebook like my father's, except mine holds small budgets for people who make a good mess of kindness. Tomorrow I'll drive into town to meet a nonprofit director who needs help sorting grants and payroll. There's no stage for it, no bonus tied to applause. Just tidy numbers that let important, unflashy work keep moving. If someone calls that old school, I won't argue. Old school is the hand that steadies the ladder. Old school is the river that carries the barge. At night, I reset the porch light and listen to cicadas stitch the dark together. The mountains hold the silence without hoarding it. Integrity, I've learned, is simply not getting tired of telling the truth. The rest is just arithmetic.